Chapter 27, A Family Affair. Mother, Father, I've made a decision, Draco announced. The Malfoys' hands froze around their wine glasses, the atmosphere thickening with anticipation. I think you're right. From what I've seen, the Order doesn't stand a chance anymore. They can't spread their message, and they're losing every fight. It's only a matter of time. Draco set his fork and knife down on his plate, his gaze downward. I'll do it, he muttered. I'll tell you what they're up to. Lucius gripped Draco's shoulder tightly, the pressure almost painful. Good, he breathed, his voice low and intense. I knew you would see it, Draco. You've made the right choice. Narcissa remained silent, her expression steady. Draco had expected her to release a breath through flared nostrils, a sign of the relief he often witnessed, but her face revealed little, save for a slight downturn of her thin lips. His father continued eagerly, we have news, too. Something that can restore our former glory. Draco feigned curiosity, though a spark of genuine intrigue flickered within him. What is it? We've been in contact with your Aunt Bellatrix. She's eager to assist us in reclaiming our place among the Death Eaters. Family means more now than ever. Draco's eyes widened in disbelief. You. But how? Lucius retrieved the mirror, and for hours, his parents shared everything. They revealed details he hadn't expected them to disclose, the orchestrated attacks, the reasons behind concealing the mirror from him. We needed to be certain of your loyalties, you understand, Lucius said, satisfaction lacing his tone. Now that you've made this choice yourself, the Dark Lord will not punish you for a brief lapse, especially when we deliver Harry Potter into his hands. Unless, Narcissa interjected, her voice cool and measured, you believe the Potter boy possesses some ability that might allow him to overcome the obstacles in his path, Draco? Draco studied his mother closely. Her words sounded mostly neutral, but was there a hint of doubt? No, he replied firmly. Potter's ordinary, he's always been ordinary. He just got lucky over and over again, Lucius mused, but not anymore. Draco felt his throat dry up as he took a sip of his wine. Not anymore, he echoed, a sense of finality in his voice. As midnight approached, they gathered around the fireplace to reach out to his aunt. Nephew, Bellatrix's face materialized in the mirror, her gaze piercing, alive and well. Have you finally regained your senses? Your mind is your own again. His parents tensed beside him, and despite the honeyed tone of her voice, her expression was anything but friendly. Each word dripped with unspoken demands, questioning why he hadn't reached out sooner. I've been biding my time, Aunt Bella, Draco replied, rolling up his sleeve to reveal the altered dark mark. It hasn't been easy. That girl Potter drags around with him figured something out that prevented me from contacting anyone. The spell's broken. It's true, Lucius interjected quickly, pushing up his own sleeve. She has destroyed my mark as well. The mudblood is quite resourceful, Bella. A surge of anger twisted in Draco's stomach. He imagined burying that burning sensation beneath something cold and dark until it was extinguished. Bellatrix's expression softened slightly. No matter, we will dispose of that scum before we bring Potter to the Dark Lord. And the blood traitor Weasley boy. Too, when he dies, Potter will know that none of his allies are left. Draco forced himself to lift the corners of his mouth in a semblance of a smile. You've positioned yourself close to Potter, then, Draco? Bellatrix leaned closer to the mirror, her voice a whisper. Tell me. What have they been doing to prepare the little baby boy to face the greatest wizard who ever lived? A thrill of anticipation coursed through Draco's body, but he knew he had to tread carefully. I can't be sure, he said, narrowing his eyes. They spend a lot of time reading books that don't seem related to anything, and they won't tell me why. It's top secret, even within the Order. Still, I suspect they must be trying to give Potter some extra powers because they're all. Books on magical history often mention a variety of enchanted artifacts, like the Ram's Horn of Uric the Oddball and the Hogwarts Founder's artifacts. At the mention of these items, Bellatrix suddenly went still. What? Draco asked, studying her closely. Do you know what that means? No, she snapped, her tone sharp, but you must be right, Draco. They must be trying to give the Potter boy some false sense of power or weaponry, hoping he can withstand the Dark Lord, but he will fall. She waved her hand dismissively, as if the words were inconsequential, yet Draco knew Bellatrix was one of the worst liars he had ever encountered. Years of fervent loyalty, combined with her time in Azkaban, had made her remarkably transparent. It was clear she was on edge. They had rehearsed this conversation with Bellatrix meticulously. Draco understood he couldn't press her for details about Hufflepuff's cup or speak of it too directly. He needed to approach the subject carefully, hoping she might eventually drop a hint about its location, while ensuring she didn't feel so threatened that she believed the Horcrux was in immediate danger. Still, she continued, you must be vigilant. Pay close attention to their plans and report back to me, Draco. Together, our family will deliver the final blow in this war. The next morning at breakfast, as the rest of the order was distracted, Draco exchanged a subtle nod with Hermione, Harry, and Ron, signaling that their plan had progressed as intended. Potter and Weasley brightened at the acknowledgement, but Hermione's gaze lingered on him, as if she were trying to read the details from his mind through legilimency. Draco wished he could share his mother's oddly tight-lipped reaction with her. It was unusual to see his mother keep her cards so close to her chest around family. He would have gladly traded his weight in galleons for some of Hermione's insight. But they no longer had the luxury of time. In the aftermath of the failed flyover, order meetings were stretching late into the night and starting long before dawn. After narrowly escaping notice by diving into the downstairs bathroom, Draco knew the stakes were higher than ever. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley had put their foot down, and Draco and Hermione agreed it was best to stop meeting at night. That alone would have been frustrating enough, but what irked Draco even more was the realization that most of the order seemed convinced it was only a matter of time before Hermione and Ron became an item. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, Draco overheard Fred telling a visibly embarrassed Ron, I'm telling you, Ron, you've got to stop waiting around. Hermione's smart, sure, but she's not a mind reader. This is the perfect moment to sweep her off her feet. I dunno, Ron mumbled, sounding uncertain. Dunno. George chimed in. You just turned into a bloody war hero, didn't you? I'm sure half of Azkaban fancies you now. Fred nodded in agreement. And remember, you could lose an ear any time, every second counts. Draco realized he was scrubbing a dish so vigorously that its owl design had fluttered onto the back of the ceramic to escape his onslaught. He placed it up to dry with a sharp clang and stormed out of the room. From that moment on, he began to see signs everywhere. Mrs. Weasley would usher Hermione into the seat next to Ron at mealtimes. Hagrid would ask Ron and Hermione to feed Buckbeak together, a knowing twinkle in his eye. At least Pansy seemed to share his disdain for this behavior. Draco noticed she had claimed a seat beside the hearth every evening, right next to Ron's usual spot by the fire. Ron would go strangely still when she sat down, and Draco began to catch snippets of their hushed exchanges, though the words were too quiet to decipher. It took all his restraint not to tease Pansy about having feelings for Ron, but somehow, he managed to hold back. Instead, Draco found himself daydreaming about what might happen if, one of these evenings, he simply reached out and placed his hand over Hermione's as if it were nothing. He could almost picture the order's reaction. The shock on Hermione's face was something Draco couldn't shake off. Some days, he found himself on the brink of confessing his feelings, his heart racing with the thought. He reasoned that even if word got back to his parents, he could easily brush it off as just another part of his cover. He could imagine himself saying, I've devised the perfect way to gather information, this way, she'll tell me everything. But one thought held him back. What did Hermione truly want? In those stolen moments they managed to carve out in cupboards or during their kitchen duties, he sensed there was something she wasn't revealing to him, making it even harder for him to voice the words he'd been trying to articulate since Azkaban. Don't dive in head first, Draco reminded himself. He needed to maintain some semblance of control, yet, it was becoming increasingly difficult to envision a future without her. He pictured the end of the war, traveling abroad, and there was Hermione beside him on a flying carpet, keeping a safe distance from the edge while discussing stabilizing charms. In another vision, he saw himself 5 years down the line, working in whatever version of the ministry remained after the chaos, with Hermione seated at the desk across from him, focused on stacks of paperwork, her lip caught between her teeth. But then, his mind would drift to darker scenarios. He imagined Hufflepuff's cup slipping through their fingers, Voldemort's return to Britain, and a devastating blow dealt to the Order. When he envisioned fleeing the country, Hermione was always there, huddled in a rowboat with frightened eyes. She had to be. If she didn't escape, he wouldn't leave either, that much he knew. As winter faded away like the embers of an old fire, Draco carefully fed select pieces of Order intelligence to Bellatrix, ensuring that the last remnants of suspicion surrounding his so-called family chats dissipated. April rains began to patter against the roof of Potter Cottage, and with the mists of spring came a new plan to spread the truth throughout Wizarding Britain. We've figured it out, he thought, a sense of determination rising within him. Hogwarts, it's the one magical hug where we still have an advantage, Ginny declared one evening during an all-order meeting. The safe house guards had just returned, and the front room was packed to capacity. If Dobby, Winky, and the other house elves can get our pamphlets into the students' hands, they can take them home. Then, their parents can share the information with everyone they know, and so on. Now that's an idea. Hagrid exclaimed, his eyes lighting up, and loads of kids will be going home for the Easter holidays at the end of April. Good thinking, Ginny, Remus added with an approving nod. It wasn't just my idea, Ginny replied, glancing at Luna and Pansy, who had been spending most afternoons with the other two girls. Pansy shrugged, her expression weary as if the weight of the Order's challenges rested heavily on her shoulders. But Draco recognized the determined lift of her chin. Luna, still looking delicate but mostly recovered, sat propped in a chair. With a serene demeanor, she continued, we thought we'd bind the leaflets in groups of several hundred, then disguise them as extra spellbooks. That way, even if the Carrows or Professor Snape search students' trunks, they shouldn't find anything out of the ordinary. We'll need advanced transfiguration to avoid Snape's scrutiny, I'm afraid, Professor McGonagall remarked thoughtfully. But I'm sure our allies at the safe house will devote themselves to this effort. With this new direction, the Order felt revitalized. Draco, Hermione, Harry, and Ron welcomed the distraction, grateful for the shift. They had been pretending to work diligently on Harry's supposed clemency block, but the truth was, they preferred the rest of the Order to be as occupied as possible. For hours each day, they brainstormed ways to extract the Horcrux's location from Bellatrix, a task that felt incredibly delicate. I wish we could just hex it out of her, Harry said one afternoon, spinning his wand absent-mindedly in his hand. Meanwhile, Hermione drummed her fingers on a stack of texts about Hogwarts. I still believe we'll have to take the risk of being more specific about the Founder's objects, Ginny said, glancing at Draco. What if you told her directly that you've gone through our things and found the diadem or the locket, or even both? That might make her anxious about whether we also know where the cup is. That's a huge risk, Ron countered. What if she decides to tell you-know-who? Then he'll realize we're after the Horcruxes, and there goes any chance we have of getting to the cup. I'm not sure Bellatrix would inform him, Draco replied slowly. No one knows that the Dark Lord was collecting the Founder's objects. All Bellatrix is aware of is that she was entrusted with Hufflepuff's cup, the Cup of the Covenant, and she has to keep it safe. Harry shook his head. Still, she'll want to keep Voldemort updated on what we're doing, won't she? That diadem was powerful. She could easily let it slip in a report that we've got it as a weapon. We can't risk that. Yes, but, Draco rubbed his temples, she needs to think we're on the trail of the cup, or she won't give anything away. No, Hermione interjected. Wait, she needs to think the three of us are on the trail, not necessarily you, Draco. Her eyes sparkled with inspiration. I have an idea, I think I've got it. Draco spent the evening in a state of heightened nerves. They rehearsed Hermione's plan repeatedly, all three Gryffindors playing Bellatrix until Draco could steer the conversation back to where they needed it to go each time. After dinner, he stormed into his parents' tent, his expression twisted in a scowl. They were sitting by the fire, his mother holding the mirror, ready for the scheduled discussion with Bellatrix. They looked up as he pushed the flap open. Has something happened? Lucius asked, his voice sharp. Yeah. I mean, I think so. This is impossible. Draco ran his hands through his hair in frustration. I think they've had some sort of breakthrough. I can't quite figure it out. Bellatrix is going to. I can't get the Order to share the important details with me. She'll think I'm not putting in enough effort, but I'm doing everything I can. Come sit, his mother urged. Draco complied, his gaze bitterly fixed on his feet. Narcissa placed a comforting hand on his back. Bellatrix understands that something this significant will take time. He forced a laugh. Yeah, Aunt Bella is such a model of patience. A slow sigh escaped him. Let's just get this over with. Muffliato, he said, directing his wand at the tent flap. Narcissa lifted a mirror and called out, Bellatrix Lestrange. In an instant, Bella appeared, walking outside, the moonlight cascading over her dramatic waves of hair, making it look like dark water spilling over itself. Sissy, she greeted, Draco. Lucius, what news of the Order? Draco has been working tirelessly to uncover new information. Lucius replied. Of course, the Order remains biased against him due to his connection with the Dark Lord. They're hesitant to trust him completely. Draco couldn't help but cast a sidelong glance at his father. Lucius had jumped in to speak for him like this back in 5th year during the Dark Lord's occasional visits to their home. He had thought his father was trying to present him as a desirable recruit, but now he recognized that his father's intervention was also a protective measure. He redirected his focus to Bellatrix, twisting his mouth back into a scowl. Yeah. Something's happened, and I tried for hours to get any details, but they shut me out of the room. He shook his head. I think they must have caught wind of one of those artifacts thereafter. That's got to be it, otherwise, why would they be so excited? Bellatrix halted in her tracks, standing alone on her wooded path. You say they shut you out, did you listen at the door, Draco? They cast enchantments against that sort of thing, Bella, Narcissa interjected. Let Draco speak, Sissy, Bellatrix snapped, cutting in. Narcissa recoiled, clearly taken aback, while Bella struggled to regain her composure. I only mean. You're right, my nephew, this could be very important. Such a weapon could threaten the Dark Lord's plans. You must tell me everything you remember about their conversation. Draco let his scowl soften into a serious expression. Well, before they kicked me out, Granger was reading one of those history books, and Weasley and Potter were flipping through a book on advanced charm work. He frowned, trying to recall more details. Yeah, that's it. Weasley mentioned something about location spells. Then all three of them got really excited and told me I had to leave right away. He met Bella's gaze, her eyes shadowed by their lashes, reflecting no light. If it's a location spell they discovered, Draco said slowly, shifting nervously in his seat, then they must have figured out where to find one of those artifacts. What are we supposed to do? How am I supposed to find it? Bellatrix began pacing again, glancing above the rim of the mirror as if to indicate her interest was waning, but Draco could see the tension in her full lips. We may be able to hold them off. You'll need to stay alert for any hints about where they're searching, Draco. Listen for any talk of wizarding museums, private collections, or, her eyes briefly locked with his, her voice taking on a falsely light tone, even Banks. That was all Draco needed. How in the bloody hell, Ron exclaimed, are we supposed to get into the Lestrange vault? That's got to be one of the oldest vaults in Gringotts. Hermione chewed her lip anxiously, excitement coursing through her veins. The odds were long. Of course, but they finally knew where the Horcrux was. Couldn't we ask Bill? He used to work for Gringotts. Ron snorted. Yeah, and what good will that do? He'll just recite that old security protocol. There's a poem on the door for us, said Harry. And remember, they've tightened security in Diagon Alley by about 10 times since Azkaban and the flyover. A long silence followed. They were in Ron's and Harry's bedroom, with two of them sitting on each twin bed. Typically, Hermione and Draco made a point of keeping their distance during these meetings, but Ron and Harry had plopped down so quickly on Ron's bed that Hermione now found herself sitting just a few feet away from Draco on the other bed. It shouldn't have been as distracting as it was, but her mind kept drifting back to the last time they had been on a bed together, sneaking up to her room nearly 2 weeks ago, just before 2 in the morning. She had been incredibly grateful for the silencing charms back then. With her cheeks warm and determined to keep her eyes off Draco, she redirected her focus to Gringotts. Outside, cool rain drummed against the window, and they could hear Ollivander's wand-crafting machines whirring gently somewhere below. Above them, Fred and George clattered around with their broadcasting equipment. "Maybe the extra security could actually work in our favor," Draco said slowly. "Diagon Alley is still under no apparition rules. That means getting out of Gringotts is going to be a lot slower if we can't just disapparate from the bottom of the steps." Hermione realized what he was suggesting and let out a little ooh. "Care to fill us in?" Harry asked, glancing between her and Draco. Draco reclined against the pillow and stretched his legs out in front of Hermione, his knee just inches from hers. "I'm saying we don't need to get into Gringotts. If we can get Bellatrix to take the Horcrux out for us, we can wait in Diagon Alley and ambush her." Harry frowned. "And how exactly are we supposed to do that?" "Well, forcing the actual withdrawal should be simple enough," Hermione began, reaching for a piece of parchment to jot down notes. "We just need to make her believe that the Horcrux is in danger of being stolen, as if her vault is no longer a safe hiding place." And she looked up at Draco with excitement. "Maybe that's where Bill can help us. He could provide details that would make it seem like we really know how to break in." "I doubt we need that much," Draco replied. "Gringotts is run by goblins, and Bellatrix holds them in about the same regard as she does house elves." "Okay," Harry chimed in, a spark of excitement lighting up his eyes. "So, Draco, when we're ready, you tell Bellatrix we're planning to steal something from Gringotts, and the goblins are going to help us get it the next day." "Just like that?" Ron said, sounding incredulous. "You think she'll buy it right off the bat?" Hermione frowned. Why wouldn't she? She has decades of prejudice that will lead her to distrust the goblins. "Yeah, but we can't just drop everything on her at once, can we? It'll sound like you're outright telling her to go to Gringotts and make an emergency withdrawal." "You've only just gone over, Malfoy. She could smell a rat." They paused, considering Ron's point. "Hang on," Harry said slowly. "What if we ask Bill to invite a couple of goblins to headquarters? He's been writing letters to goblin groups for months. We could ask them to say a few lines, and Draco, you and your parents could use that mirror nearby to eavesdrop. If Bellatrix hears it straight from the goblins that they're agreeing to help us, then there's no way she'll think you're making it up." Draco looked impressed by the idea. "Not bad, Potter. But there'll be no going back after that. The moment she hears a conversation like that, she'll head straight to Gringotts." His expression hardened. "And I wouldn't want to be the goblin who has to deal with her when she gets there." Hermione felt a twist in her stomach. She hated the thought of putting innocent goblins in the path of an angry Bellatrix Lestrange, but they had to find a way. Task at hand, the Horcrux retrieval plan. With Gringotts now a part of their scheme, the involvement of its workers was inevitable. Hermione finished jotting down her notes and leaned back, taking a moment to consider the framework of their strategy. "Okay, there's still a lot we need to figure out before we get to that point," she said, her brow furrowing in concentration. "For starters, how are we going to get into Diagon Alley this time? We can't rely on Polyjuice Potion again." And, Ron chimed in, "We need to make absolutely sure that the four of us can take on Bellatrix Lestrange, grab the Horcrux from her, and get out without 100 Aurors descending on us." Draco flopped back onto the bed, the springs creaking beneath him. What could possibly go wrong? He quipped, a playful smile crossing his face. Hermione couldn't help but smile back. Their eyes met for a moment, his tousled hair against the pillow, his knee brushing against hers. She felt a flutter in her stomach and quickly looked away, though she could have sworn she noticed Ron's gaze flicker, puzzled, to the spot where she and Draco had touched. This was the first time they had sought outside help to locate a Horcrux. It felt odd to make the request to Bill, carefully sidestepping the true reason they needed assistance from the goblins. Yet, the alliance underscored how close they were to achieving their goal. That sense of collaboration sparked an idea for entering Diagon Alley as well. They decided to enlist Dobby and Winky, who could bypass the apparition wards. The elves would enter Ollivander's shop, where the Great had been disconnected from the FLA network. Using Professor McGonagall's unregistered FLA method, they could create a pathway to headquarters, right past the wards. Between these plans, Draco handling Bellatrix's demands, half the order focused on the Hogwarts operation, and the other half stretched thin with battles across the nation. Hermione thought headquarters couldn't possibly be busier, but then, one morning in late April, they were abruptly pulled away from their preparations. For the first time in months, the Death Eaters were on the move. Tonks had just tested one of their charmed spellbooks, trying to peel back its facade to reveal that it was actually made from leaflets. Unfortunately, she hadn't managed to make any progress. "We should tell Minerva it's ready for Friday," she said, her spirits lifted as she raised her arms. "Anyone fancy helping me up?" "Everything's such a..." Just as she was halfway to her feet, she gasped, one hand flying to her stomach. "Dora?" Lupin called sharply. Tonks's face contorted in a grimace that lasted a full minute before she finally sighed and straightened up. "It's nothing. It's been happening for weeks. My body's just practicing, I suppose." But 20 minutes later, as a dozen members of the order sat down for lunch, it happened again. Tonks let out a muffled shout and clutched the edge of the table. "Oh!" Mrs. Weasley exclaimed, "It's happening." Instantly, everyone sprang into action, their voices overlapping in a flurry of concern. Mrs. Weasley waved her hands, shooing them out of Tonks's way. "Give her space to breathe, all of you. Here, Tonks, dear." She guided Tonks out of headquarters and back to the tent she shared with Remus. Before long, Mrs. Weasley returned, bustling back inside to inform everyone that this could be a lengthy process. And they couldn't all sit around holding their breath, as the baby might not arrive today or even tomorrow, but it was no use, concentrating on anything else was impossible. Hermione, Draco, Harry, and Ron had intended to go over the map of Diagon Alley to search for hiding places near Gringotts. They unrolled the sheet, stared blankly at it, and managed to utter a few half-hearted sentences before hastily retreating downstairs. All day, other order members came and went from the safe houses, breathlessly asking for updates. Kingsley, who had watched Tonks grow from a trainee, dropped by so often that he eventually settled in the front room with a stack of his own paperwork. The old reports came in. And Draco simply said, "I'll wait." And wait they all did. The sun dipped lower in the sky outside. As the hours passed, Hermione found herself shifting around the front room, inching closer to Draco, until they eventually ended up sitting side by side on the sofa. No one seemed to notice. "I hope she's all right," Hermione said breathlessly, casting yet another glance at the closed front door. "Maybe her metamorphmagus abilities will make the process less painful." "Maybe," Draco replied, raising an eyebrow at her. "You know what this reminds me of?" She lowered her voice to match his. "What?" "Last fall. When we were still living in that tent in the garden, and Remus and Tonks were on the run. You were worried about them then, too." Hermione smiled softly. "Yes, well, a baby is a delicate thing no matter where you are. Have you ever seen one, a newborn?" Hermione glanced over at Draco. "Have you?" "Sure, pureblood babies are all very fancy and important, remember?" He smirked. She let out a little laugh. "I was there when Pansy's brothers were born," Draco continued, glancing across the room at Pansy. "And one of her cousins when we were 13. Hermione bit her lip, her worries for Tonks mingling with the complex feelings she had about Draco and Pansy. How effortless it must have felt for them, but before she could respond, the door burst open. It was Remus. His hair tousled and his eyes wide with excitement. A radiant smile broke across his face, a youthful energy shining through him as he exclaimed, "It's a boy. We've named him Ted, of course." The front room erupted in joy. Kingsley knocked over his stack of papers as he leaped to his feet, Hagrid bellowed his congratulations, and Sturgis and Fleur hurried to bring out bottles of elf-made wine that had yet to be opened. Remus blinked rapidly, as if overwhelmed by bright light, and moved around the front room, buoyed by the news. As the well-wishes from the entire order filled the air, Ron and Pansy stood in front of the fire, both looking equally stunned, as if the news had taken them by surprise. After a thunderous round of backslapping and handshakes from the Weasley twins, Remus made his way to Draco and Hermione. Meanwhile, some members of the order busied themselves, moving between rooms to fetch more wine and food from the kitchen. In the midst of the commotion, Remus leaned in closer to them. Draco, Dora would love for you to come to the tent and meet Teddy. She wants to have family there, he said. Draco stood up quickly, excitement in his voice. Yes, of course. Remus lowered his voice further. She says you're welcome too, Hermione. With that, the three of them slipped out into the front garden, passing a sniffling Molly Weasley, who stood watch, and made their way to Remus's and Tonks's tent. It was modest but tidy, a far cry from the elaborate multi-room setups of Fred and George. The single room featured a small kitchenette in one corner and a bank of enchanted windows on the opposite side. Beneath those windows, Tonks sat up in bed, looking tired and sweaty, cradling a bundle of blankets in her arms. Come on, come closer, she said with a weary laugh. This parenthood thing isn't contagious. Hermione, Draco, and Remus gathered at the bedside, and Hermione leaned in to gaze at little Teddy Lupin. His tuft of hair was slowly changing from golden to dark blue, and his round face was speckled with red, his skin soft, wrinkled, and unbelievably delicate. A wave of emotion hit Hermione, and she felt her eyes prick with tears. He's beautiful, Tonks, she whispered, though the words barely captured the depth of her feelings. This tiny baby was a poignant reminder of the world outside, one they needed to shape into a safe place for him to grow up in. Thanks, Hermione, Tonks replied with a warm smile. Want to hold him? Oh, I. Hermione stammered, hesitant. You won't hurt him, Draco said softly, extending his hand toward Tonks. Can I? Sure. Here he comes. Tonks said as she gently lifted the bundle and placed it into Draco's arms. With careful precision, Draco cradled the baby close to his chest. A small smile crept across his thin lips as he gazed down at the baby's ever-changing hair. See? Easy does it, he said softly. Hermione felt a peculiar squeeze in her chest, unable to tear her eyes away from the scene. She didn't reach for Teddy. Instead, she watched as Draco lowered a finger toward the baby's tiny waving hand, marveling as those delicate fingers wrapped around it. Listen, Tonks began, her voice warm and earnest. We wanted to ask if you'd be his godfather, Draco. It's going to be tough for him growing up without grandparents. I want him to feel like he has family around when he needs it. Draco's eyes widened in surprise, and he grew momentarily still. You don't need to answer right away, Remus interjected gently. It's a big responsibility. And there are others in the order we might ask. Take all the time you need to think about it, I'll do it. The pink flush in Draco's cheeks deepened, and a genuine smile broke across his face. Yeah. Sure. The prickling sensation in Hermione's eyes intensified, mirroring the tightening in her chest. Tonks and Remus erupted in joyful exclamations, with Tonks cheerfully warning Draco that he'd better know what he was signing up for, because she'd be counting on him for babysitting whenever she wanted a weekend to herself. But Hermione barely registered their words. The world around her seemed to fade into silence. She couldn't look away from Draco, captivated by his smile and the tender way his thumb brushed over Teddy's tiny hand. In that moment, it felt as though her feet were hovering just above the ground, and she was certain that anyone who looked at her could see her emotions laid bare, as if written in indelible ink. Before long, Draco returned Teddy to Tonks's waiting arms. I think we'd better head back inside, Hermione said, her voice slightly shaky. The others might be wondering where we've gotten to. As they made their way out, Mrs. Weasley cast them a curious glance. The tent, but Hermione was past caring. She pulled Draco toward the corner of the house, stopping where the path curved around to the narrow side garden. Draco, there's something I need to tell you. He paused, a look of caution crossing his face. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her courage. I feel very seriously about this, about us, she blurted out. About having a future together, even if we haven't quite defined what we are to each other. So, I suppose I should say, if you don't feel the same way, I'd really prefer to know now rather than later. Panic surged within her as she realized her eyes were stinging again. I mean, she continued, trying to sound more composed, I've sensed there's something you haven't been saying since Azkaban, and with Pansy around, I've thought about how simple things seem between the two of you. I know that if we keep going like this, it'll only get more complicated. Her mouth felt dry, and the silence stretched uncomfortably. The worst part was the way Draco was looking at her, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Right. Mortified, Hermione took a step back. Well, I thought you should know how I feel. And now you do, so, I'll just, she trailed off, her words hanging in the air. Suddenly, his lips curled into a smile. Why was he smiling? I love you, too, he said, and Hermione felt her heart stop. Looking into his eyes, memories of the past year washed over her, sending a thrill from her toes to the top of her head. Of course I love him, she thought, dazed, of course I do. But she couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had happened. Was it at Azkaban? When the fear of losing him had gripped her? At Malfoy Manor, when she'd seen him push through the crowd, risking everything to save her? Or was it that very first evening in the cottage, when they had sat together at the dining table and he had told her she didn't need to be afraid, but Hermione had no idea what that really meant. Until this moment, she hadn't recognized the depth of feeling behind those words. She had loved him long before she even had the language to express it. How typical of him to respond with an I love you, too, to listen to her practical, analytical confession and hear the truth that lay beneath. Oh, she said softly. In a single stride, Draco closed the distance between them and kissed her deeply. Hermione's hands instinctively rose to cup his face, feeling the coolness of his skin in the night air and the strong pulse thrumming in his throat beneath her thumb. More difficult? He asked incredulously, then kissed her again. More difficult? You actually thought I'd care, after months of raiding prisons and dodging Death Eaters, you thought I'd care? Hermione's heart felt like it had restarted, now performing giddy leaps in her chest. I didn't want to make assumptions, did I? She replied, her smile so wide it nearly hurt her cheeks. Their kisses became clumsy as she wrapped her arms around his waist, and together they melted back into the shadows of the side garden, moving toward a secluded, windowless patch of wall. You do, don't you? Draco murmured at the corner of her mouth. Do I what? Do you love me? Yes, she whispered. Yes, I do, I love you. And you don't care if it's more difficult? Hermione let out a light laugh. No, I actually like a challenge. So do I, he breathed, but before he could finish, she cut him off with a kiss, pushing him back, directly into a flood of warm yellow light. The side door had swung open, and a pair of figures stepped through the threshold, their hands intertwined. They collided with Draco and Hermione, who sprang apart in surprise. The two figures quickly withdrew their hands from each other. It was Ron and Pansy. Each pair stared at the other for a long moment, the music and laughter from within headquarters spilling out along with the kitchen light. Then, Ron and Hermione exclaimed in unison, I knew it. You did? Draco and Pansy replied, their expressions a mix of surprise and confusion. Just then, Harry appeared in the doorway, casually chewing on a slice of fruitcake. He glanced between Draco and Hermione, then Ron and Pansy, his curiosity piqued. He said, a grin spreading across his face. Does this mean I can finally tell Ginny about you all? Hermione couldn't quite tell who reacted first, but soon all five of them were caught up in a fit of uncontrollable laughter. Pansy leaned back against the doorpost, her forearm pressed to her eyes as her shoulders shook with mirth. Ron and Harry were doubled over, while Draco stood with his mouth slightly open, laughter lines crinkling at the corners of his eyes. Just when Hermione thought they might regain their composure, Ginny and Luna appeared, Curious about the ruckus, their arrival triggered another wave of laughter that echoed through the garden. Hermione leaned against Draco, their fingers intertwined, laughing until tears brimmed in her eyes. Meanwhile, Bellatrix strode through the rain, her head held high as water cascaded off her umbrella. She welcomed the end of April, a month that had brought its fair share of storms. Yaxley was waiting for her at their usual meeting spot. "Ah, Madame Lestrange. You've arrived." And he sneered at Wormtail, who was scuttling along at Bellatrix's side, delightful company. "Yaxley," Wormtail replied, his voice a small, resentful wheeze. The three Death Eaters made their way down the shadowy lane, the wind gusting around them. Ahead stood a house secured behind a sturdy gate, its walls made of simple brick. "Are you sure he can't be contained any longer?" Bellatrix asked, a hint of impatience in her tone. "Quite sure," Yaxley replied. Bellatrix drew her wand, her nails gliding along the length of the blackthorn wood. The Dark Lord had hoped to keep him secure until his return. And considering the events of the past few days. "Yes," Yaxley murmured, his expression troubled. Bellatrix exchanged a brief glance with him, her respect for the wizard lacking. He was a man of little substance, believed that the Dark Lord deserved nothing less than brilliance from his servants. Her blood was pure, and her loyalty was unwavering. She was certain he had also noticed the warning signs over the past few days. In Nottingham, a city that had been subdued since the events at Malfoy Manor, a group of witches and wizards had launched an attack on a band of snatchers, freeing mudblood children taken from their muggle parents. In Ipswich, posters calling for the capture of Harry Potter had been vandalized with graffiti proclaiming, "Long live the boy who lived." Reports from Wrexham suggested that locals were even capturing the Daily Prophet's delivery owls. It appeared that the Order had somehow managed to disseminate news to witches and wizards across Britain. Bellatrix was baffled by this development. The Malfoys had said nothing about a renewed effort for information, yet she couldn't dismiss the palpable shift in the national mood. Draco had mentioned several safe houses controlled by the Order, and this new push must have originated from one of those locations. As they slipped through the gate and crunched over gravel toward the front door, Bellatrix seethed with frustration. If the Dark Lord had returned from the continent just 2 weeks earlier, he would have witnessed the fruits of their labor, a nation nearly won. Now, however, the Mudbloods and their muggle-loving allies seemed to be fighting back in a desperate last stand. This would surely diminish the impact of her efforts in his eyes. On top of that, she couldn't shake the nagging worry that the Potter boy had set his sights on the Cup of the Covenant. But she reassured herself that the cup was safe, even if the Order was aware of its location. In centuries of her family's dealings with Gringotts, the bank's security had never been compromised. Goblins, though inferior creatures, were reliable in fulfilling their roles. After all, there would be no reason for them to continue existing in wizarding society if they weren't. Yaxley knocked at the front door, and Travers answered immediately. "Madame Lestrange," he greeted her. Said, offering Wormtail nothing but a scornful glare, "Travers." Bella stepped inside, unclipping her rain-soaked outer robe, which she tossed into Wormtail's fumbling hands. "Where is he?" "This way." Travers led Bellatrix and Yaxley down the dimly lit hall, leaving a cursing Wormtail to deal with the robes. The house was in a state of severe neglect. Dust coated every surface, and dead insects lay curled upon the floors and beneath tables. They entered a modest kitchen, the only room that bore any signs of life. A few dishes were piled in the sink, while others, half-washed, sat on a rack, as if someone had absent-mindedly forgotten to finish cleaning. The Death Eaters gathered around the table, where Pious Thickness, the Minister for Magic, lay. Bellatrix knew him to be a formidable wizard. Yaxley's greatest achievement in the Dark Lord's service had been casting the initial imperious curse on the former head of magical law enforcement. Since then, Bellatrix and Travers had maintained the curse themselves, with Travers having a particular knack for the spell. But the moment she saw Thickness on the table, she recognized that her fellow Death Eaters were right. It was no good. Thickness' dark hair was disheveled, and though he was immobilized, his eyes darted from side to side. He was conscious. Aware, Thickness had begun to resist the curse, and if he could fight against Bellatrix's and Travers's imperious curses, there was no other curse, save for the Dark Lords, that could overpower him. As Bellatrix watched, his gaze became fixed once more. He had succumbed to the spell again, but they couldn't risk him clawing his way back to lucidity while addressing the public. Bellatrix surveyed the kitchen with distaste. Thickness had been living a half-life these past months, returning home to eat mechanically and then sleeping until summoned back to his public duties. His eyes began to swivel again, locking onto Bellatrix. She could see the loathing in his gaze. The thirst for freedom. To break free and challenge her. Normally, she might have enjoyed the confrontation, but her thoughts were consumed by the Dark Lord's potential displeasure at their puppet having outlived its usefulness. Bellatrix glanced over at Travers. I trust you've had him write a letter to his office explaining his upcoming absence? Yes. A nervous complaint, I've called it. It aligns nicely with Skeeter's latest article. Good. With a flick of her wand, Bellatrix aimed at Thickness and uttered, Avada Kedavra. Pious Thickness slumped over the table just as Peter Pettigrew entered the kitchen, freezing at the shocking sight. Clean that up, Wormtail, Bellatrix commanded as she strode past him. Come, Yaxley, Travers, we have much to discuss.